Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our work session. It's Tuesday, February 28th, and we will begin with a discussion about our RAP tax history and policies. And we'll start with our city manager, Gary Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. In your packet tonight, on page 3 is a staff report that is kind of a summary of how we got to where we are right now and what we foresee in the future as potential revenue collection above and beyond what we've already programmed, and then potential uses for that, which is still to be determined. And I'll just briefly walk through the history, especially for the benefit of the council members that weren't here when it was enacted, and push me along if I'm going too slow or reel me in if I'm going too fast. But we initially had a RAP tax, which I've started to call RAP 1, that was voted for by our residents back in 2007 to help construct Centerpoint Theater. At the time, it was an 8-year authorization. The state law has changed since that time, and now they're authorized for 10 years. So for the first 8 years of our RAP tax, 90% of it went to build Centerpoint Theater. The other 10% was just collected by the city, and we used that for a variety of different things. Sometimes it was grants to the Joy Foundation, but mostly we just collected it. Voters reauthorized the RAP tax in 2014, which was scheduled to sunset in 2016. And that was for another 10 years. And as we did that, the council recognized the value of having some categories so that we could tell to the residents what they were going to get with the RAP tax. That was really important. The primary purpose was to be able to build Creekside Park. We'd purchased that property with, we'd purchased the Staley piece, the 7-acre piece, with general fund, capital project fund money. Then the Swaney piece, which was on the Mill Street side, which is another acre, we purchased with using the 10% of leftover RAP 1 money. And then we used RAP tax money to build the park. Because we weren't going to collect enough each year, we anticipated, based on collections, that we were going to make the original outlay out of our capital projects fund and then pay that fund back with RAP tax money as it was collected over the years. So 75% of our initial projection, which was a total of $4.5 million, was what we thought we would collect over 10 years, was to be spent to build Creekside Park. 14% it was decided would be used for other parks and recreation needs. And it's helpful to remember this is way before the Trails Master Plan this was back when we were still hoping to find a way, right, Jesse, to begin building some trail things. And so, but we identified 14%, and the idea then was we would pay as you go. We would try and avoid, we would save money in order to build those projects rather than projecting how much we might collect too much, because we didn't want to over-project and under-collect. And then 11% was set aside for grants for arts and cultural organizations. We began to develop policies that next year about how that would be spent, and those have changed a little bit as we've had different council members sit on committees, and we've seen different applications come. We've sort of, kind of honed in on that a little bit. But the idea with those funds was that if we didn't spend the money in any given year, that money would roll forward to be available for grants the next year. That's happened, I think, just one time. And then one time the council, rather than rolling forward funds, decided to spend the money on a different use, the pickleball courts, which we have not built yet. So every year we monitor very closely what I'm now calling the RAP 2 funds, our second authorization, to make sure that we are collecting and repaying ourselves for the projects that we've committed for, and that we know how much money is available for grants each year. We also went through a process, if you turn the page to sort of that detailed timeline, we went through a process back in 2018 to survey residents and then prioritize how the 14% was going to be spent. So in January 2018 at the retreat, we reviewed a resident survey of how our residents thought that 14% ought to be spent, and you can see what they listed as their priorities. We did for the next several months, talked about how the council wanted to take that input and prioritize it, and came up with, beginning at the bottom of page 6 and onto the top of page 7, this prioritization at the time of what the 14% RAP collections would be spent on, knowing that we still had years to collect money. That was the preliminary sort of version. The next major thing that happened was, as we were starting to build the town square and the idea came about of putting an ice ribbon there, it was, well, what's a possible funding source? So Tyson and his team and Galen went back to the drawing board and said, okay, how are collections coming compared to what we thought we would collect? And we thought that we would have an additional $1.5 million that we could spend after we paid ourselves back for Creekside, that would be available for the town square. And so we've just kind of moved forward under that policy. And so if you turn back to page 4, you can see that what we have done at the top is tried to summarize what our expenditures have been versus our revenues and how much is committed to date. So as I mentioned, from RAP 1, we had 10%. We had about $209,000 left over. We used that 209 plus a little bit more to pay for the Swaney property for Creekside Park. And then with the RAP 2 authorization as of the beginning of this current fiscal year, we've collected $3.97 million. We've spent $3.523 million. So we had $657,000 in fund balance. However, we still have $2.3, almost $5 million in commitments that we have to pay off before we have available funds. Those commitments include what we owe still for Creekside Park. So if you'll move down to that next table that says RAP tax expenditures, FY 2015 through 2022. In the far right-hand column, you can see that as of the beginning of this fiscal year, we still owed $334,619 from RAP tax to the Capital Projects Fund for Creekside. We will finish that commitment this year, and then we also owe 1.5 back to pay ourselves back for the ice ribbon. And then we've carried forward $30,000 for Eggett to Holbrook Trail, $214 for the North Canyon Trailhead after having spent $40,000, $20,000 for Lower Ward Canyon Trail, and then $250,000 for Twin Hollows pickleball reconstruction. So again, we have basically $2.34 million committed to projects that we have not yet spent. So then we took the next step, and I think these questions came from Cecily, and your timing was great, council member. This was really a good exercise for us to go through to see where we stood and then to project, because we then went back to Tyson and Galen and said, okay, let's resharpen our pencils and let's see what our projections look like moving forward. And we now project that based on above average sales tax collections that we've seen over the last several years, that we believe we will collect an additional $1.2 to $1.5 million beyond the obligations that we have now. So that's essentially an additional 1.5 that we can use, assuming we collect it. Now, this is all based on that we have collections, sales tax collections continue to happen in the negative territory, in the positive territory. So it's based on about a 2% sales tax growth. over the next few years. Sure, microphone on.
So just to be clear, that's projected for, through the end of RAP 2.
That's
The
exactly right.
Uncommitted, if projections, I mean, if things hold steady, 1.2 to 1.5.
Yep.
Uncommitted.
Through the end of RAP 2. Yep.
Okay.
Now, we, of course, said, all right, we know we have a lot of needs out there. And so we also put in the staff report just a list of some of the projects that either we know we have needs for, we've identified that could be eligible for RAP tax funds, or that we had actually identified to potentially be paid for by a future RAP tax authorization by residents. What in the budget book you may or may not remember, we've titled RAP 3. That's a future, possibility if residents want to reauthorize the RAP tax in probably 2015. So with those projects that we've identified,
Excuse
I just
me.
want to run through really quick. Oh, yeah.
Just to be clear, you said 2015, but do you mean 2025? Like that would be on the ballot in 2025?
Yeah, thanks. I
If-
lost a decade
If the
somewhere.
council decided to move that forward?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. That is what I mean. Yeah, it would probably be on the ballot. It could be on the ballot as soon as 2024, not 2014, 2024 or 2025 to be able to begin collections in 2026. So I'd like to take just a minute and talk about the projects that we have identified, and our recommendation would be to go through the budget process, just like we normally do, to see if and when we want to allocate this additional 1.5, or if we want to be cautious and allocate a portion of it and then wait a couple of years to make sure that collections are still coming in as we project. But there are many projects that we know we want to do, and that are, when I say the tier 1 must do now, it means the project is a priority by the city council. It fixes existing infrastructure and/or is a project that's already underway. The projects in that category include Washington Park design costs. So that $375,000 that's the design and engineering portion of the entire Washington Park Escape Park project that for some reason, we just inadvertently, when we were giving the project budget, we just forgot to put it in. It would otherwise be paid for with capital projects funds, but we could instead use RAP tax funds to reimburse ourselves for it, if that makes sense. We just received the bids back, as you know, from the skate park, and the bids have come in about $50,000 more than we budgeted for the park. And so it's, as I mentioned, the timing was really good to go through this analysis, because it's going to allow us to build the park like we want to, rather than maybe deleting $50,000 worth of concrete or elements in the skate park. So that would be a recommendation. And then, of course, the citywide automated irrigation controls in our parks, which we are in the process of evaluating, getting bids for. That's $250,000 to $250,000. Those are all things that were identified as high priorities to the city council. The only one that isn't underway yet, but we are actively designing, is the park irrigation system. Tier 2 projects, which are things that we have known are problems but aren't necessarily priorities today. One is to replace the lights and controls and the lighting controls at Mueller Park baseball fields. You may remember that there's a transformer there that has been problematic, and we actually took out of service, I believe, entirely a couple of years ago now. Has it been 2 or 3? Third season this year. Mueller Park Baseball has asked for that to be replaced, and we told them we don't have the funding for it now. It could be available through the RAP 3 authorization unless they wanted to provide funding for it, and I think they've just indicated they'd rather wait. But we could now fund that. And then repairs and improvements to Creekside Park. Now that the park's been operational for a few years, we're starting to see a little wear and tear in areas, particularly in the stream bed. to the suspension bridge. It's going to need some tender loving care and a few other things. The pump water feature, a few things like that we know we have needs. They could wait for a future RAP tax authorization, but we could certainly use the money now. And then finally, Tier 3 projects, which I think we would consider important, but certainly could wait, and that would be additional lights at Town Square. That park was originally intended to have lights around all of the seating benches, you know, sort of the cantilevered grassy areas. We were supposed to put lights underneath all of those. That was value engineered out of the project, and if you've been by the park at night, you know how dark it is. We think for safety as well as just for usability, that adding additional lighting would be really good for Town Square. So we would like to do that. We've had requests to upgrade the power at the stage too. Some venues haven't been able to do what they'd like to do, or at that venue, I should say, some performers, because I'm not exactly sure of what the issue is. Brock's a little more familiar with it, but we've had to bring in a spider box, I think, at times. And then, other things that we know could use as much money as we're able or willing to put toward is our downtown art project. That was identified as a fairly high priority by residents back in that 2018 survey. And then trails. We have all kinds of uses for RAP tax money for trails. So there are plenty of potential uses for that 1.5. And I think our recommendation would be to use the budgeting process to go through that prioritization process. This really was just in response to some questions, but we've got, I think, 10 minutes or so, or we have our commissioners here, we could turn the time over to them and come back to this, but Mayor, whatever you'd like to do.
Sure. So, I'm excited that we have our commissioners here to join us tonight. And just before we turn the time over to them, I did want to make sure if there were any questions that you had specific to this RAP discussion. Be great.
I have one suggestion that we might consider in the Tier 2 when we get to the budgeting process, and that's Rocket Park. That maybe we consider some master planning or some upgrades at playgrounds. We have the one playground that's not safe and is fenced off, and that would perhaps be a good use of money. I think there's a good case to be made that if we go to the voters with RAP 3, that Rocket Park has some unused or underutilized spaces that we could maybe re-envision, and prepping for that might be a good use in Tier 2, along with the playground.
Yeah, we do have that playground
Should
next to the
totally include a rocket.
ball field that isn't usable now. Right, so that's a really good catch.
Just following up on Councilmember Bradshaw's suggestion, what would be the feasibility of doing a resident survey, just even going into the budgeting process? I know we're looking at it, it's kind of staring us down, coming up really quickly. Or maybe RAP 3, if it comes to a RAP 3 process, that might be the best. But there are these uncommitted funds that are fairly significant, and something that I've seen in budget documents, and we've talked about also, in addition to the love that Rocket Park needs, is Cheese Park. That has been identified many times and in the budgeting documents as priority. And the needs at Cheese Park, aside from the pickleball fund, the funds that have been set aside for pickleball, and I don't know if we could even just address that right now, just Cheese Park and how that fits in with a possible discussion with some of these funds, or our capital improvement funds, because that also is a wonderful space, but a little bit underloved right now.
Yeah, I'll back up just a little bit. There were some discussions, definitely amongst staff and a little bit with the council, that I don't know how much everybody will remember, as part of the budget process 2 years ago or so, about what a third RAP tax authorization would look like and whether or not it was a good idea. It's certainly my feeling that we ought to take it, if voters reauthorize RAP Tax 3, it ought to be focused on improving what we have rather than adding additional assets that we have to maintain and will add to our operating costs. We did a lot of adding with RAP Tax 2, and of course that brings additional operating costs. Now we have some really great venues, but just like Cheese Park, that so in other words, instead of using RAP 3 to build a new park or buy new property, maybe it would be better if we use that money to rebuild that park, to improve it. And so that was when that's when Cheese Park was added as a future redo if RAP 3 was authorized. That's kind of where that idea came from. And those are philosophical policy questions I think that you guys are going to want to wrestle with is, what do we want to use RAP 3 for? Do we want to add? Do we want to improve what we already have? Those kinds of things. Does that answer the question where that came from?
Thanks, Gary. It does. I would love to have seen it on this document because in our budget, it's a little bit hard to see that that's something that we're looking at as a priority for a potential RAP 3, but it looked like it was more of a current RAP priority. And maybe Galen and I had a good discussion about that a couple of weeks ago, just some of those prioritized projects. And that's what I'm thinking about Cheese Park,
Yeah,
Twin Hollows.
The only reason it wasn't added, we just didn't think we would have enough money to do anything with enough money to do what needs to happen at Cheese Park.
Yeah.
And I think we would also still suggest that some of these other Tier 1 and Tier 2 needs are more important, even Tier 3 are more important than a redo of Cheese Park. But that's entirely up to the council. So.
Right. Thanks.
And my only comment is, thank you, this has been very insightful and helpful, is as we discuss a potential RAP 3 and how those funds might be used, it would be helpful to have an analysis or report or master plan of some level of our parks, like Cheese Park and Rocket Park, and what the elements that are deficient and what the cost would be to bring that up to ideal standards and or opportunities there. So if there was some sort of breakdown of those different park projects that are old, that'd be great.
Great suggestion.
Any other discussions on this?
Mayor, could I make a comment?
Please.
As we approach RAP 3, I think that it is important that we have some potential ideas, projects on how we can best prioritize those funds. I also think it's important that we understand that we can go to the voters with our past book of work, and they can see what amazing projects we've been able to leverage by having some discretion with the funds as well. And I would hate for us to go into the process of asking voters again for RAP 3 with the idea that we'll have those funds fully committed, rather than them looking at the body of our work and us relying on their trust in us that we'll, again, use those funds wisely to leverage great projects just like we have in the past. And I think that kind of a relationship does exist already to folks who have paid attention. And I think some leeway in those future funds would be a great position to have.
Thank you. Good comment. Anyone else?
Mayor, may I ask just one last question? And maybe this isn't something that we address right now, but I'm kind of asking Tyson and Galen and our manager here, just as we're looking at this potential legislation that could, the proposed legislation that could really impact our current RAP tax with the sales tax discussion. Have you done And we don't need to get into the weeds. I recognize we have our county commissioners here, and we want to turn our time over there, but are we looking at how that might impact the RAP tax? Or are we just going to wait and see? I mean, what are our internal discussions about this proposed legislation?
And just to be clear, are you referring to the homeless legislation, or help me understand which legislation?
I wish I had it right at my fingertips. I should have come more prepared with that, but maybe Kate, the proposed legislation to, and maybe it's been resolved, I have not followed this 100%, but the proposed legislation to do away with sales tax on food.
So that one is it's a combination package where they would reduce the barrier in the state budget system between the general fund and the income tax fund. And part of that trade-off is that they would reduce the state portion of the sales tax on food. There would need to be a deal finalized with the education community that's still reportedly far apart, and then there'd also need to be a constitutional amendment on the ballot because that provision about income tax being so dedicated would have to go to the voters. Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but in all of the conversations, the local portion of the sales tax on food stays exactly as is, and it stays in the base for things like RAP taxes. So we would not see a reduction if all of those pieces were to come together. We wouldn't see a reduction in our base. I think that's one of the things that the nuances that sometimes fly below the sound bites, that the local portion sales tax on food would stay.
That's great clarification, because I had thought that it was going to impact the local portion as well.
It was definitely a messaging point from the league to ensure that state leaders understood that it stood as a part of our base for all of these other components.
Thank you for that clarification, and thanks for the good discussion. This is ongoing, of course. Thank you, Galen and Tyson and Gary, for your good work on this, and this is a great springboard into the discussions that we'll have come budget time. So thank you for your work, and these conversations will continue. So we're really excited to have two commissioners with us tonight, and it's really Commissioner Stevenson that's here on our agenda, but Commissioner Kamalu was kind enough to also come to give us a little update on library situation. So thank you for being here tonight, and we have a couple of just things to run by you, but before we get into that, is there anything that you'd like to just share from a county standpoint that would? Yeah.
No, just a couple things. Some of these are just, I think just the chat, so I appreciate that. One, listening to you talk about the different projects with your RAP tax and the things you're doing. One of the things that we've believed as we came into the commission 4 years ago was that working along the side with the cities trying to make Davis County, and when I say Davis County, I don't refer to Davis County government. I refer to Davis County as an area and all the things that are there, which is made up of 15 cities, which we're all very familiar with. And I think the thing that we find at the county level is that we are actually considered one of the model counties in the state of Utah. There's very, very little infighting that you'll see within Davis County. We seem to work well with our cities. It's interesting as you talk to some of the other counties, how much of this goes on within the cities and the counties. In fact, I think there's been a battle going on just south of us a little bit right now as far as it goes. And we kind of took a stand that we're going to work together, not only within ourselves, but also with the communities. Part of the things that we believe makes this county a wonderful place to live in is all the amenities that we have. We have 15 cities with 15 different personalities, but each one of these cities offer things to everybody in the county to be able to do. If you stop and think about it, in about 20 minutes, if you head up past the Bountiful Bee or Farmington Canyon, you can be basically in a somewhat of a wilderness area that you wouldn't even know an urban area was here. answer me this question. How many other counties in the state of Utah, in 20 minutes, you can be in the midst of a herd of wild buffalo out on Antelope Island? The diversity that we have here is totally amazing, along with all the other things that have, whether it's your ice ribbon, the veteran parks that are numerous throughout the county, the entertainment type things, Bountiful Arts, Davis Arts, Centerpoint Theater, all these things that make this county an absolutely wonderful place, and we do appreciate the things that you guys do, on your part. Now, one of the things you also talked a little bit about was a little bit of legislation. I find it interesting that I've had the opportunity to serve at the city level. I've had the opportunity to serve at the county level. I've also had the opportunity to be somewhat of a developer. And one of the things that drives me crazy is that when I see the legislature basically trying to take away what I consider to be the jobs of the local governments as far as that goes. And I think that we have to, as a group, both cities and county, not be afraid to stand up for what we believe is right. I'm not going to say cities, and this kind of comes from the development side of me, say I agree with everything cities do, because there's sometimes I get very frustrated working with cities when it comes to development. But I still highly respect the fact that every city has that right, and that's why you guys are elected, that's why we're elected, to basically make those decisions for what the cities and the counties want. And I think that we have to be very, very protective of that and work as closely as we can for the legislators to understand the fact that it is important. If I had my way and I could write a job description for somebody running for state legislature, I would say you have to have some type of city background. You need to do that because it gives you a whole different perspective. I had a conversation, this was within the last hour or so, we were talking about funding and things that we can do. And we turned around and
Put this a little higher for
on that side. We turned around and got talking a little bit about funding, and I asked this question. I said, how many people out there think cities have all kinds of money, think counties have all kinds of money, and think the state has all kinds of money? And they said, well, maybe 80% of the people in each of these areas think they do. And I said, well, how much money, extra money, do cities have? And they said, really none. I said, well, what about counties? Oh, we know we don't have a whole lot of money. I said, but who does have a whole lot of money? The state. I mean, these guys have had boatloads of money as far as it goes, which is good. It shows that we've got economic growth within our state. But I think one of the things that I chuckle a little bit at is you talk about the sales tax and maybe making sure it doesn't affect our local funds as far as what we get through the sales tax, especially on food, is that a lot of times I think legislators can turn around and think, well, there's a lot of money out there, but they don't have an understanding of where we are as far as the cities and counties go. And I think that it's very important that we stand up for it. And again, that's my soapbox a little bit just from listening to you guys on it. So, but I do love the legislators. I have a lot of good friends there and appreciate everything that they do. A couple of things I think just want to point out is we came into office a little over 4 years ago. One of the attitudes we also had was that we believed that there were dollars that needed to be injected back into the cities and the county, and there need to be things done to help the development. It's the old saying that you can't make money without investing money, and we highly believe in that. Some of the things that we've been doing is, again, you're familiar with the fact that we are basically taking the Legacy Center. We took the fair away. We created the concrete floor to be able to utilize it for more things. We've got another facility that we're going to build next to it. We're putting into it, I think, around $50 to $55 million. And the whole goal is to basically try to create an economic impact that will impact this entire county and drive more dollars and more people here. We love to have people drive into our county, and then after a week or so of spending their money, we love them to turn around and drive back out of the county. It just gives us the opportunity to do more things. We've been involved with libraries. I think Lorene can maybe answer some questions on it, but we've finished the Clearfield Library, the Syracuse Library, and the discussion now moves down into our area here. Here in Bountiful, I think over time, I think that we've got a deal worked out with Eagle Point Drive, is that what it's called? Eagle Ridge Drive, as far as it goes, that we were supportive on it. As far as the Bonneville Trail up here, I think we've put $500,000 into improving it across your city. We're working with the Bountiful Bee situation that we're trying to get that taken care of, and hopefully we can get that resolved. We've, on the North Point, what's called North Point, North Canyon Trailhead. We've put $500,000 towards that. The Bountiful Arts Council, we've given $15,000 on an ongoing project with that. Trying to think all the different things that we've tried to do. And so these are the things that we believe is important to invest in all the cities to be able to help things grow and again, to make this county a lot better. Some of the things that I think that we have to be looking at in the future is, and again, to me, this becomes part of this countywide family that we are. And I think that and I'll just tell you a real quick story where I kind of learned this concept. When I was on the Layton City Council, I was very, very young. And we were just finishing the Layton Commons Park, which is the big park around the city offices and that down there. And as we authorized the funds for the very last part to be put in, I asked the question, I said, how did this park ever even become, the goal, the idea, the perception of what it should be? And the guy that was there that had this old book of minutes, and he opened this book up and he turned back and he says, okay, I'm going to answer that question for you right now. And he says, 1959 April, whatever the date in April was. And he says, Councilman Richard Stevenson made the motion that we, and he read this to us. And I said, really? And he goes, yep, that's what the minutes say right here. Well, that council person happened to be my father. And I had no idea on this. And so in 1959, I wasn't old enough or big enough to even remember what was going on, let alone, know my dad was the city council at that time. And so I stopped by my parents' house on my way home, and I told my dad this story. And he said, I want you to understand something. I said, sure, what's that? He goes, especially in local government, decisions you make are going to impact the future more than they're going to impact today. And he says, never forget that. You've always got to be looking out to see what's there. And I know Lorene would say that I'm always talking about that. What can we do as far as the future goes? And a couple of things that I think that we have to try to, figure out. I think one, the paramedic thing that we took care of and got that going is a big deal. That's something a lot of people have tried to accomplish. And we as a county, as a family, were able to do that. I think that the 911 is something. I think the BRT, as we're getting that figured out, these are all these things that we have to turn around and say, okay, what is going to happen? What are people going to 15 years from now say, you know what, those people were pretty smart? And I think we have to continue to look at that. One of the ones, and this becomes just a kind of a personal thing that I see, I use Legacy Parkway quite a bit. And I notice, the Bountiful landfill. And I think it's great that we're able to have two facilities in this county to be able to service our people. But my question is that do we need to look out in the future and figure out, are there some things we can do with the Bountiful landfill, no different than we've done up with the Wasatch Integrated, to basically make these even better places and maybe even things that become more appealing to the public and to the vision of what our county is. And, I don't have answers for that. I'm just thinking these are things, trying to think out of the box. But these are some things, and again, we could, carry on for, an awful long time talking about different things. But I'd like to open up. You guys have any questions of me? I know, Kendall, and you had some, excuse me, Mayor. I'm one that if you run into, please call me Bob. Commissioner Stevenson is like saying a paragraph. And so my grandkids call me Bob. Lorene calls me Bob. Unless she's mad at me, then I won't tell you what she calls me. And so feel free on that. And I have a tendency to do that too. So no disrespect, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As you're talking, it's reminding me of the great partnership we have. And there are so many things that we have worked together and that we continue to work together on. And we need your help, and we are we're grateful for your help. And it is nice to know that you're there as a good partner. So thank you. I would like to open it up to the council, but before we do, would you mind, Commissioner Khumalo, just giving us a little library update, and then any questions that we have for the commissioners would be great.
Yes, thank you. Lorene Khumalo, one of the other commissioners. And I know each of you. Thank you. Well, on the periphery, maybe I still need to meet some of you, but thank you so much for your service in this great city. So the fair has morphed into the Agricultural Heritage Festival, still an annual thing, more of a traditional fair. We were hoping that the new facility on the grounds of the Utah State Extension would be ready in time for the fair this year in August, but there's more delays. Imagine that, supply chain, or no, actually kind of weather. The big equipment is sinking into the mud, and so they're not able to use that heavy equipment very well right now. So we'll see. It was supposed to be done in June, and the fair is supposed to be in August, so we'll see. But there is, a morph of a fair, which is important for some people. They really like knowing that. And that arena, we will own the building for 15 years, but it will be programmed by Utah State Extension. It's perfect for them, and then beyond that 15 years, they will own it. So that's been a pretty cool collaboration. So the library, I hear that Bountiful's very interested in this discussion. And the county is too. It's a big deal. I supervise the director of the libraries. We have 7 branches. This one here, located in Bountiful, is older now. Its systems are at the end of life. Imagine that. And so it's been ongoing discussion about doing a study. We did a study on the building itself. That's how we found out all the systems are at end of life. And then we did a public survey and had a lot of great response from the whole entire county about the entire system. So there's also data about where people are coming from that utilize libraries. So we've taken all of that so far. It's important to know that there's a library board. The board actually governs the library system. I am on that board, but there's multiple other people who are also on that board. And so we have met with all of the cities in the south part of the county once prior to the survey, and now we're making sure that we meet with all of the cities in the south part of the county now that the survey has been complete. I want to really recognize that Bountiful has been very engaged in all of this. Several of you came to one of the 2 public meetings where anyone could come, and so, your people have been staying right up on it, and actually several of you have been. So the latest is that the board wanted the director, Josh Johnson, to meet with the cities, and I am too, and to find out what properties, what pieces of land they are aware of, that they either own or that they know of that could be within a very specific circle, because all of the data points that if we could land a building in this specific circle, that would be the best prime location for all of the southern part of the county. There's also a little bit of an openness in the board to a second location that would look a little different. It wouldn't be like the Bountiful located library is right now, but the library has learned how to do a lot of services with the disruption of the pandemic, and even the Syracuse remodel. There's other models out there that are not as big and robust if we were to consider 2. So the board is kind of considering 2 or 1, and you might want to chime in, Mayor, with what you all have said to us. Do you want to do that? And then I can answer any other questions.
Sure. So today when Gary and I met with Commissioner Khumalo, we talked about the option of offering the land that is just on Main Street in front of the City Hall as a library location. And so the county knows that we would love to see a library there, or also the other location that's more north, next to the town square. So those were 2 options that we gave as possible locations for a new library.
Yeah. And so we have met with North Salt Lake, that was yesterday, with their city manager and mayor. Today was Bountiful and Woods Cross. And I think we have West Bountiful on the calendar. One of them, though, we haven't heard back from yet about coming in at a specific time. But so with what all of these cities share with us, It's all been very open and transparent and hopefully collaborative all along in this process. And then the director, Josh Johnson, will take what people have told us to the board and say, here's what we've learned from all of the cities, and then the board will have some additional, discussion about that. So it has been budgeted that we actually do architectural work this year. And the board, like we've been telling all the cities, the board doesn't want to delay. It just gets more and more expensive the more time passes. It's really shocking with inflation and the costs of construction that, we know what it would cost now. It would cost about $10 million to build a building similar to the size of the Kaysville Library, which is now a sized library and a library functioning very successfully with how people come and utilize libraries today. And so we know that with the money that was set aside from 2017, that it could finance a library similar to the one in Kaysville. If any of you have ever been to that one, it's a great library. We also know that about 1.5 acres could be enough property. So the property that Bountiful told us about today, that's a pretty cool piece of property. And one other thing that we've hoped to do, if it can work out to do, is that we keep the current library functioning while we build another one, which that piece also allows us to do. So, yes.
I have a question
Jesse.
regarding that. What obstacles do you see that would prevent us from keeping the library in Bountiful?
Yeah, there's no obstacles for that. So it's really just the goal of making sure that the data helps us decide where a great location is. In fact, you all could have this, my copy, and then it shows you a circle where all of the data points to. If there's something in the circle, it would be a great location for the entire southern part of the county. Let me hand it to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, he tagged a couple of pages, which we've been focusing on that.
And I'll just share too, that we found that from the data that the county collected, we found that this library here in Bountiful is the most utilized of all the libraries in the county.
Yeah.
And so,
That's true. And you can see why. Not only does Bountiful love it, but any of these other cities are also coming here. Something important to consider, which I have brought up a lot, is that, right now, 90%, it's in that, no, over 90%. Is it 96%? 96 or so percent of this county can be at a county library within 10 minutes. That's pretty good. We are a small county, in square miles. We're the smallest of all Utah counties. But to be in a public library within 10 minutes is awesome. Almost all of our population can be to a library. And then I think it's 68% of our population can be to a public library, the county system, in 5 minutes. So, me, I'm like, well, we probably have, 7 libraries pretty well located right now for the entire population of the county. But it is true that this library and the older one located in Clearfield were very similar in design. Like they could function as a bomb shelter. Any of us who love libraries, which I am in that category, you go downstairs and I can only imagine the fun down in the lower levels of those 2 buildings. It's going to be a different design because everything that's been constructed in recent libraries are smaller.
They're about out of time.
Oh dear. What else do you want to know?
any last questions for Commissioner Kamalu about the library?
You'll love that packet, I think. It's pretty cool.
I have a quick question. I know at one point there was a standard as far as the libraries within the county they wanted to be separated by a certain mile standard radius or something along those lines. Is that still a standard?
We've done better data since that time, so this is the better data. But that circle where all the data points that if there was one for all of the southern part of the county, it should be in this, that's based on the latest of the studies and the data that they used. Does that make sense? Yeah. The other one was before they did all of this, I think some years ago before I was a commissioner, and with the former library director. Interestingly, though, it was like as the crow flies and not driving on actual roads. So we really like this. We really like this data. Yeah, you'll want to look at it, Millie. It's good.
Any last library questions?
I'm curious if you can share if North Salt Lake or Woods Cross had any land to offer.
Yes, in today's meeting, I said North Salt Lake could be in the room and they would be happy to, be asked and to share. They're another really great partner. All of these cities are. And so they have been getting all of the land around their Hatch Park, right there by their city building. And they have plans. In fact, infrastructure is already going in with their latest phase. And they will have a building go up that will be kind of a multi-use with possibilities for library service within that building, as well as their, as you know, kind of discussing the satellite location of, yeah.
I'm familiar.
Yes,
Rec
you are
district
familiar.
satellite facility.
So they still have openness with possibilities. And then Woods Cross was the last appointment today, and they had thought of several things. They knew quite a bit, but some of them aren't quite in the circle, and even if they are, they're on the north end of that circle. And one of them also is on the other side of the highway. Like, we know how important it is to be in the mix of things where people are already going for errands and retail. We consider it weighted if it's in the area where people go for a lot of other things, because then it seems very convenient. And so, yeah, they were awesome as well. We've been getting really good input from all the cities, so we'll just take that back to the board.
Are you aware that we're going to have BRT right here on Main Street?
Yep, your representatives told us that today too. Yes, and that is huge. Yes, although it's getting watered down, I've been told about really what the BRT might be, and that makes me sad because I really think BRT is amazing. Yeah.
Mayor, could I ask a quick question? So this is so exciting, and I think all of us on the council and everybody in Bountiful City loves our library, the county library, the extension here. We love it. Love to see it stay here on this Main Street area where we have, so kind of like you talked about, that bustling hive of activity, which is so important to utilization of libraries. But what I'm wondering about is you had just referenced that this fiscal year is when the money's been set aside for the architectural plans. So that's going to be really site specific.
We have a different fiscal year than you. Did you know that? Ours is the calendar year. So we've got time more than your
But
fiscal year.
you
But
are,
yes,
you
it's
are
so
right.
fast.
It is, they are determining, they're making a decision within the
yeah.
next months.
Do you have like just kind of a general time frame for or timeline? We want to have the location cited by, I don't know, the fall or?
That's a great question. This is a guess. I'm going to guess that because we have a library board meeting every month, what did I say? It's the first Thursday of the month at 1 o'clock, open and public meeting. So we have people come. And so we have that meeting coming right up on March 7th at 1. It would probably be very interesting for Bountiful leaders to come and be there to hear the discussion. And I believe that Josh will present everything that we know from all of the different cities and things to be considered in the locating of it. And my guess is that they probably won't make a site final decision here in March, but I bet you they'll try hard to make it in by April. That's going to be my guess. And because he keeps saying to everyone, and it's true, that the board really wants to keep this moving. And, the longer we don't do it, the more prices go up. And so we just need to make a decision and get going. Yeah.
It's exciting that we're to the point where you're making decisions soon.
Yeah.
Because this has been in the works for years,
It has been
as
in the
we all
work
know.
before I was even a commissioner. This discussion was going on. But some libraries, believe it or not, were failing before this one, so they had to kind of change what to do first and second, and then the big finale, I would say. Not that they won't ever do anything again, but like we just talked about, if over 90% of people can get to a library within 10 minutes and almost 70% of people can get there within 5 minutes, maybe we're getting close to having enough library buildings for this county.
It's exciting.
The biggest it's, the biggest cost is not building it, the biggest cost, and there's data in there, tells you what it costs to operate that thing for all the years to come, and it is pretty eye-opening. So it is an actual amazing investment. And I would just finish by saying that I believe that libraries and public education are the great equalizers of society. And I could tell a lot of stories to back that up. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah,
Thanks for being here, and we really appreciate that update. So,
welcome. Thanks for being so engaged.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Commissioner Stevenson, if you don't mind, we have a few more questions for you. And thank you so much. I would just want to take a minute and thank the county for your work, because you've really been operating in good faith, working with us to help us with the Bountiful Bee and to help us with things like the Eagle Ridge Drive. And so anyway, we really appreciate it. Just wanted to see if you had any legislative things. I know that we were concerned about DIDS and just Senate Bill 295. Just wanted to see if you are involved at all, or if you have any thoughts on that, or anything else with the legislature, or anything else that you'd like to tell us about.
Well, one thing, Ron just whispered in my ear, flood control. Kind of laughed to think that we're even talking about flood control, because we've talked about no water for so long and that. And in working with the Public Works and that, one of the main things our Public Works does, we only have like 25 roads that we care for. So our Public Works does an awful lot of work with the flood control and that. And our flood plan is 100% complete and done and ready. The feeling is that if we do turn around and get into the flooding situation, everything should be handled, it should be taken care of. In fact, I asked Adam Wright, who's our Public Works Director, about today, and those of you remember 83, and he said, you know, it's a night and day difference between how prepared we are now compared to what it was. It's hard to believe 40 years ago as far as that goes. So flood controls were good. As far as the legislation goes, and again, I'm not going to quote bill numbers, but just the bills we're talking about. One of them is dealing with the homelessness, with what's there. We have homelessness in Davis County. Can't hide the fact that we do. We have between Davis Behavioral and Safe Harbor, and also, what's the third one?
Open Doors.
Open Doors. We do have a lot of beds and a lot of use of what's taking place. I'm a believer that with what's taking place right now, that Davis and Utah counties are both taking a little bit of pressure with this bill that is going to be there, that we are going to have to maybe open our eyes a little bit more to what we're going to have to do or be prepared for as far as homelessness goes in the future. And I think that future is the near future. I don't think it's down the road a ways. I think it's going to be upon us right quick here. We have been very supportive in it, because we feel that this is one of the ways that we can try to at least show and tell our tales with what we do, but also figure out how to get funding for it. There has been some talk as far as the transportation bill dealing with the fifth on that, to utilize some of those dollars for homelessness. From my perspective, I'm 100% against it. I think if the legislature wants Davis County to get involved with homelessness, then they're going to have to help us figure out how we're going to fund it. Using transportation dollars that we need to keep working on trails and roads and all that stuff is not the fund that we want to take it out of as far as that goes. Going to as far as the land use, probably the easiest way for me to say it is I'm against it. I just don't believe that, as I said earlier, that the legislature needs to dictate land use. So,
Thank you. Just one more concern that I wanted to share with you, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but the Bamberger Bridge with UDOT, they're considering removing that bridge, and it's just right there on the border of Woods Cross and Bountiful, and so. Actually, Gary, do you mind chiming in about this?
Francisco, did you happen to have a picture of that we could put up?
Yep.
We kind of primed the pump.
yeah, so as he's getting that up, just to tell you, back in my younger days when we used to run marathons, one of the routes that we would take as we increased our distance to get to the 20 miles we needed to do is we'd start in Layton and run all the way down here to Murdoch Chevrolet. And I can always remember when I'd come down, we'd go underneath the bridge and then come up and you could go back in there. It was always one of the great times to see that dang bridge there, to be able to think, I am about done. Well, I was about done in more ways than one, but that was, so.
So this is one of the few leftover vestiges of the old Bamberger Railroad, right? I mean, there's a few cuttings in Farmington that we're aware of that I used to live next to, but this has been on our road system for a long time. It's actually in Woods Cross, but it is, if anybody who's leaving town from Bountiful and going south, almost everybody uses that route to get out. Well, we found out just this spring that UDOT has concerns about the bridge's stability, and they have no plans to replace it. Their solution was to just take it out, make that a dead end, and then that would reroute all of our Bountiful traffic down 15th South past, Vasa Fitness, through the roundabout, and onto 5th West into Woods Cross. And their models say that it would be just fine for that intersection at 5th West and 1500 South. In other words, it would function at a D level. That's their definition of just fine. But what it doesn't take into account is all of the development that we're planning on having right there at Renaissance Town Center. The BRT, it would require that the BRT to change its route, which was also planning to use that. At any rate, we are hoping that you are going to see shortly a joint application from Woods Cross and from Bountiful for some of our fourth quarter funds. I believe it's fourth quarter funds for that regional need. We're extremely concerned about UDOT's desire to just take it out. It creates so many traffic issues, not to mention economic development issues for the car dealership there.
If you're okay with it, because I know those guys at UDOT pretty well as far as that goes. Let me have a visit with them and just kind of see if I can get a little bit from that side. The other thing that I'm wondering is away from the fourth quarter dollars, would there be a possibility on the infrastructure bill? I know that as far as that goes, in fact, I got a thing from Moore's office the other day stating that there are dollars that he has available, or they have the ability, Chris Stewart, to do the same thing as far as trying to get dollars. Maybe one of the things we can do is work with Woods Cross, you guys, at the federal level and UDOT, and see if we can get dollars to replace it. As far as that goes, I think that one thing in the south end down here that we should, as a group, all be involved with is not only as this has become an issue, and we know that I-15 is going to be redone, but I think we also need to get that bridge in place in North Salt Lake and Woods Cross, which goes over the 2600 railroad tracks there. I think that would help a lot of things on the east-west stuff too. If you guys are interested, maybe we can all gang up together and see if we can make all that stuff work as far as that goes. So.
Yeah, I think we've jointly shared our support for those alternatives on I-15. The difference, and we totally agree, we think that's going to improve circulation all the way through South Davis if that can happen. And the difference that we've been told by UDOT so far is that that's all different pots of money, and that they have money or will have money for that project, but not for our lowly little bridge. So I appreciate and agree that looking at our congressional delegation for some of the infrastructure money, I think, is a great idea.
Let's see what we can do. So, on it. I have no.
Thanks. We
Bob.
wanted to make sure you were aware. And any other questions or?
Maybe just a comment on this. One of my major concerns, putting traffic aside, which is a strong concern, is also just the pedestrian access. There's several corridors through here that pose as a barrier to the east-west movement. And with Woods Cross High School there, it's almost always being used as for pedestrians, although there's no sidewalk or.
Yeah, I think that's part of, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you come underneath it, it's very narrow underneath it as far as that goes. And then
But on top of it also.
On that. And so realistically, just looking at it, I believe, that maybe what could be done was not only could maybe the street below it be widened, but also the bridge itself be widened if it was replaced as far as that goes. You know, I was talking to Carlos Braceras the other day, and we got into discussion about how many people are being hit by cars. Somewhere along the line, we got to figure out why people are getting ran over. I mean, it's unreal with what's taking place. And I think that things like this, even though there really hasn't been anybody hit, but these are the types, I think, situations we need to try to correct to make basically safer for the public as far as that goes. We turn around and ask people to be more involved with active transportation, and yet are we making things safer for active transportation? I think these are things, good points. So, okay, I know we're about out of time, so if there's any other.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's fine. Councilwoman Bradshaw.
Mine is not road-related. I've mentioned it to both of you, but want to make sure it stays high on your radar. You have
Yes,
an
I
upcoming
actually wanted, if
appointment.
you'll call me tomorrow afternoon, I've got a couple of names I can talk to you about, okay? And if there's times you guys want us to come, I mean, if you guys turn around and end up with a boatload of questions or complaints or whatever, call us. We're more than welcome to come down here, or you guys can come up to our place as far as it goes. We're, I think Gary's worked with the different commissions, and I think you'd say we're probably as open and as aggressive to take care of things as you've found in a long time, so, okay?
Mayor, if I may, I'd like to
Please.
note
What,
let
um,
Councilmember Bradshaw
what was-
finish her question.
What was that question?
Sure. So I had mentioned that there's going to be a vacancy on the South Davis Recreation Board. It's a position that represents the unincorporated parts of the county, so it's the commissioner's pick. And my plea was that we could sure use somebody that has a good fiscal background to help us with the budget challenges at the board. And then with the departure of one of the current board members, I'll be the only woman serving on the board. And I think keeping that perspective and a perspective of someone with families that utilize the facility were two things I just wanted to ask them to keep in mind.
On it, so.
Here's the process. Our office manager prepares some things, puts it out. So she's doing that right now. We've had some people inquire, and so we've sent them, you know, hey, she's going to put it out. Everyone can apply. Then we'll kind of pick the best ones that apply, and then do interviews.
I would love if you can share when that application opens
Yeah.
with Bountiful so that we maybe can advertise it on our social media
Great idea.
as well.
Sure.
You know, just as we leave, because we do have to leave, because you guys got a meeting, one of the things that's been really cool as far as the county, goes, is that our entire team, from the commission down to the other elected officials to our directors, it is probably as cohesive as a team there is. We get along, we make fun of each other, we tease each other. I'm probably the most sarcastic person there is, but bottom line is, everybody gets along, and it's one of those things that's really helped to continue to move things along. And, you know, we would urge everybody to do that. And I think, Mayor Harris, you've seen how we try to, as far as work with the cities and all this type of stuff. So anyway, we appreciate you running and doing these jobs, and have fun. I'm going home.
Thank you so much to both of you commissioners for being here tonight. We appreciate your partnership.
You're awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we will now move to Tyson. Mr. Beck, if you lead us through the payment processing fees discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight, excited to talk about an upcoming change for Bountiful City in the financial realm. We are looking for some guidance from the elected body to talk about the budget concerns we have about our payment processing fees. Just to kind of lay the stage, Bountiful City accepts various types of payments. We accept cash, check, electronic funds transfers, and payment cards, so debit cards, credit cards. And we also have various different methods that those payments are received. Not all payments are as cheap as others. Unfortunately, we actually have to pay to receive payments, and that goes from everything from cash payments all the way through checks and credit card payments. Some are more expensive than others, and just wanted to briefly touch base on some of the data that we pulled. For our payments that we received in our calendar year 2022, we received 206,000 different payments through City Hall, and this is the breakout by type. So of the payments we received, only about 0.5% were cash payments. Credit card payments were 29%, credit and debit card, I should say. And electronic funds transfers were almost 51% of the payments we received. And checks ended up being about 19.5%. So by and large, the biggest chunk is our electronic funds transfer, and that stems from a campaign we did a few years ago to move most of our payments, as many as we possibly could, to electronic funds transfer. This was intentional because that is the cheapest way for us to collect payment. The payment that we have to pay to U.S. Bank in order to process an electronic funds transfer is only 14 cents per transaction, as compared to our most expensive method of payment, which is credit card and debit card payments. That actually costs us about $2.55 for every $100 in payment. And just to kind of give you perspective, the difference between the 14 cents and the $2.55 is 1,721%. So the cost variance there is quite large. So obviously we want to take as many payments as we possibly could through electronic funds transfer. But obviously we still have to recognize that people need to make payment how they can make their payment. So we're not going to close off different payment types, but we obviously want to try and incentivize the cheaper options for Bountiful City. The discussion tonight is mainly focusing around our card payments. The card payments, we have to pay the credit card company or the debit card company. So your Visa, your MasterCard, they get their portion, which usually is about 1.75% to 3% of the transaction cost. Then we also have to pay our payment processor. So currently we use U.S. Bank's Elavon payment processing company. And with that, they also get a portion of the payment transaction. So we're paying two different entities for every card that we process. So the card payments that we receive are the most expensive for the city, just to kind of give some background on that. So going back to the staff report, the reason why we're coming before you tonight is we are upgrading our financial software to a newer version of what's called Enterprise ERP software. And this software, they've changed the payment processes that they accept. So we are being forced off of our current payment processor and onto a new payment processor. Unfortunately, the new payment processor will be more expensive, and we're looking at about $53,000 more in cost. So looking at our budgeting, we need to evaluate whether we're going to raise rates to cover this increased cost or begin to pass on the card transactions to those that want to use cards for their payment processing. So I've outlined two different options and just wanted to briefly discuss those. The option one would be we pass along the payment card transaction fees to those that pay with a card. We would continue to offer the options of electronic funds transfer, cash, and check payments free to the customer. The card transactions would have a fee associated with that. So just how this might look is as they're checking out online, or if they're paying here at City Hall, on the very bottom of their bill, there would be a convenience fee or a transaction fee that would be added to the bottom line. And so this would be added on top of their current bill that they're going to pay. So that's option number one. And we would not be passing on, the concept is we would not be passing on the fees that we pay for EFT or for check or for cash. This would be just specific to cards. The second option would be we increase rates, utility rates, general rates that we charge, and fees to help cover this increased cost that we're going to incur. And to be honest, that we currently incur already. So this one would spread out that the cost amongst all ratepayers or all customers of the city, rather than be more specific to those that are using those higher forms of payment. So those would be the two options we would like some direction on to try and understand how you'd prefer us to move forward. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
What discussion or questions do you have?
I've got a quick question. So just with option number 2, if you're saying that it would be, spread the cost to all the payers, no matter what method they're using, have you estimated what that would be per payer, like per month?
No, we've not done any type of analysis that way. The very tricky part about that is we have utility customers, we have landfill customers, we have cemetery customers. So what we're charging is varied, and the types of payments vary as well. For instance, most of our online payments are utility payments. Most of our coming up to the counter are, we get cemetery, we get landfill. So it varies, and it'd be very difficult to try and calculate that on if we were to raise our power rates, for instance, to try and compensate for the increased credit card fees. Then, how we break that down might be a little challenging in the calculation. It doesn't mean that we couldn't give it a go, but no, we've not done any analysis to that yet.
Just speaking for myself, I like option one. I like the transparency of people knowing what they're paying for, and also them having the option of, what payment method they want to use, and if they want to avoid a fee, then they can pay with a different method of payment. What other thoughts do you have, Council?
If you wouldn't mind going, I agree, Mayor, I'm leaning toward option one for the reasons that you stated. Could we go back to your, yes? So I was trying to do the math, so the card payments, that 29%, what is that total fiscally over the year?
Yeah, so what...
Just so those listening at home know how that would translate.
Yeah, so just in credit card fees, in our fiscal year 2022, we paid $221,000 in credit card fees. That's not including any other bank fees or various other fees that we pay for payment processing. But if we were to go specifically to credit cards and debit cards.
Do you have an idea of where the credit card, or is there a cost difference between debit card and credit card?
There is, yep.
Help me understand that magnitude.
Yeah, so your debit cards traditionally are cheaper than the credit cards. The credit card companies also are, a lot of them are your debit card companies as well. So if you look at your debit card, it's likely it's going to be a Visa, MasterCard, Discover. So a lot of them are becoming almost equal as far as that goes, but credit cards usually offer a type of cash back that the credit card companies have to recoup. So yeah, your debit cards are cheaper, but it also varies depending upon the type. So for instance, American Express is your more expensive and versus a Discover that's more on the cheaper.
Okay, so my question, do we know how many transactions for a utility bill are being paid by a credit card? Or plastic?
We don't know the breakout between debit and credit. So we only track it by card transactions. So.
How many, so we have 60,000 transactions a year using plastic. How many of that, how would you break that down for utility bill, landfill, cemetery?
I'd have to run additional reports. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
I'm in favor of option one, generally. Where I'm wondering about on the plastic side is like the landfill, the smaller, where it's quick transactions that are maybe less routine. I'm maybe a little more sympathetic to. Not because I think having credit card transactions at the landfill are important, and just trying to streamline my thoughts with the last few minutes we have, but I'm in favor of option one, generally speaking.
What other thoughts do you have?
I also just would like to express that I am also in favor of option number one. I think that there are some kind of nuances and considerations that we might not be thinking about, unintended consequences. Maybe for some people, it is, you know, the ease and use of the plastic, the credit and the debit, you know, that obviously is a reason why many people are using that. I'm not sure if we can fully anticipate all the unanticipated consequences, but I do like the additional charge being paid for those who are utilizing those services and passing that on directly to the user, that convenience fee.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other direction?
I concur that option one seems like the way to go. You know, some retailers have moved in this direction as well because of the fees to process credit cards. I was just quite frankly surprised. I thought the checks would clear at par, so I was surprised that we were paying a processing fee for checks. Is that because of a system we are using to process checks, or?
No, so the banking institution we use is US Bank, and we went with US Bank through an RFP process, and basically they were the cheapest of the rates that we could get. The banking institutions do need to recover some of their labor costs, and so and storage costs as well. So with checks specifically, they're storing the images for us through their online website, and so we can pull up any check image. So they obviously have their own costs associated with it, but yeah, it is a little counterintuitive to think that we're depositing money but having to pay to deposit money, but they obviously have to cover their expenses as well, both labor and IT costs. So.
I think it's important. I mean, if I have a rewards credit card that I like using because I like the rewards I get from it, and I recognize that it's probably one of those that would cost the city more money to process, and it certainly costs other retailers when I use it more money to process. I don't think it's fair to spread that benefit to me, you know, across the whole city, and so that's why I in particular like option number one.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, do you feel like you have the direction you need?
Absolutely. Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Thank you for your help on that. So we will now just have a quick 3-4 minute break, and then we'll come back to start our regular city council